Hey everybody, so it is, I guess when I'm recording this, Thursday, so I'm over the hump when I'm doing this, so I apologize that I haven't done a true Heresy Hump Day today, but I am going to throw it in the series like I occasionally do. I'll just throw in a little over the hump there, because I'm running a little late. I have a little bit of a program here that I put here for today's episode, but I'm suffering a little bit, I believe, from TMJ. I've never had it before. Maybe you guys have had it, but I've had some dental work done on the back of my mouth, and I don't really have any problems with my teeth after the dental work, but I've got all these symptoms that I've looked up, and they kind of seem to fit with TMJ. And it's completely controlled with ibuprofen right now. I don't feel any pain, no problems actually. But once it very predictably, once the ibuprofen starts wearing off, I'll get this like major aching in my my jaw, and it even kind of radiates like to my face and stuff. And so I've had a bit of a rough week, just taking care of things from a dental perspective and that. So that's my excuse, even though it's probably not the real reason. I probably just didn't get to it, just have been busy and stuff. So to the episode today, let's see, I am working on my wolves this week. I will do an update in a second and show you those. I have done a little bit on the tower, not as much as I've had in the past. I've probably got another good set. I got one more section done. I've been doing that sort of at my leisure and enjoying it that way, which is good. So I'll talk about that in a moment as far as the table update. I am having just a little drink today. What I have today, nice golden color. It is really warm out here in Calgary this week. It's starting to get nice. And so when that happens, I get happy. I like nice weather. I also like the winters here too. So I guess that's good. But the only little bit of sadness I feel is that it's sort of the ending of the Scotch season, because I don't really like to drink Scotch during the summer or whiskey during the summer much. I usually just like a refreshing drink during the summer when I'm mowing the lawn, and the whiskey for me is sort of like a winter thing. For several seasons that's been the case, and so this might be the last time I actually have it, as a nightcap or something until it starts to get cold again, unless we're lucky enough to get some cold weather. Glenfiddich, many of you may be very, very well-known Scotch, but this is their 15 year, which has it's probably my favorite, even though I've had the 18 as well. Reason I really like it is it's soaked in sherry casks, sherry and bourbon and oak casks, and so it has a really nice like sort of taste to it, off flavor. And so the 15 year has always been a solid one for me, and I've enjoyed that, and so that is what I'll be sipping on as we do this tonight. Outside of that, topics for tonight before I get to the table update will be the table update, quick table update this week. As well, I'm going to be talking about the Sharpe practice game I had last weekend. Now, I've been promising a comparison of Musket Tomahawks and Sharpe practice, and I kind of promised a big series on it, and I have not gotten to it, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but I am going to do a bit of talking about it tonight. And main esoteric topic, not as esoteric as usual, but one of my sort of main ramble is going to be about new editions of games and new releases, and I wonder why I'm bringing that up. But I'm going to be talking about it more in a general sense. But new editions of your games and new releases of games, and also other things besides games that you really like. New releases of them and editions of them too, and just how it all sort of relates. So that's going to be my big ramble. So let's get to the table update, and here we go. So for the table update today, I have a little bit to show. I guess I feel like I've made some progress on my wolves. I have, I guess, painted them 3 different colors, primarily a dark gray like the Warlord model that I have here. I would say 60 to 65% of them are that gray, and then next I did a number of them as brown, and then just a couple of whites or a few whites, or really light gray as well, just to sort of mix it up. I've done like the base color and some dry brushing to create the sort of effect on the fur. And today I spent some time painting teeth and tongues for those that have the tongues. I've not painted the eyes yet. Here's one with the tongue showing. And so, yeah, I think what I'll do today during the chat is just work on black noses, something pretty simple. I guess it is a little difficult because they're not that small, but they're small enough that if I'm really involved in the conversation, it might be hard. But I think it's a pretty simple thing to do, so it should be suitable for this chat. But yeah, I'm happy with the way these guys are coming along. I just really need to do the noses and the eyes, and then a couple of them have sort of head plates, like the leader, like a piece of armor with leather straps and some detailing, and in those cases I'll need to finish that up. And then I'm going to do a nice wash on them, the diluted wash, to create a little bit more contrast on the fur. And then I should be good to start working on the base. Or I'll just throw the goblins, work on the goblins and get the goblins on and do the bases last. I'm not really decided, but yeah, there's 35 of them, so I feel like I definitely made some headway. They were looking pretty poor before. I mean, I had a mixture of gray plastic and various colored primers and various things. And so they're looking actually pretty good now, I think. We're starting to look better. And then the only other thing, I guess, is I'm still working on the tower. I'm sort of like, I don't know, even though I'm over halfway on it, I'm just, every once in a while when I feel like it, I just sit down and do some sculpting and work on it. And it's coming along nice. Happy with it. And yeah, it's been good. So back to the chat. Okay, so today it's going to be noses. And so noses will be a big theme. It's too bad that I can't paint jaws, or I've already done the teeth because I've already talked about these problems I've been having this week. I could make the theme teeth the problems I'm having with my jaw and the teeth I'm painting. But no, it's noses tonight. So I think I'll do the Sharpe practice one first, and talk about that a bit. So I'll throw some pictures up. I did actually take some pictures of the game. Had a really great game. I have not had a game that I've not enjoyed of Sharpe practice. Sharpe practice, Musket and Tomahawks. This is Sharpe practice 2 that I'm playing. I've not really played the first one. I didn't pick it up. I sort of gotten into Musket and Tomahawks and just stuck with that. Right off the bat, Sharpe Practice 2 has just been released last year, so it had the benefit of Sharpe Practice 1, or Sharpe Practice. And Musket and Tomahawks came out, I believe, in 2010 or 2012, one of the two. But it's aging, in comparison. And so I'm comparing two very different publications in transition, for each company. So Two Fat Lardies makes Sharpe Practice, and Studio Tomahawk does Musket and Tomahawks. So right off the bat, as far as just the actual publication quality, I mean, Sharpe Practice 2 is a much better produced product. I mean, it's a much newer product. It had the benefit of other games and editions that Two Fat Lardies has done. And, similar to, let's say, Congo from Studio Tomahawk, which looks like a really nice book and well-done book from, like, a product perspective, Sharpe Practice 2 has that, where Musket and Tomahawks is really one of the earlier games by Studio Tomahawk. It was a translation from French to English, and they just were still kind of getting used to that, so there are some translational issues. Although, having said that, I don't find that to be a big problem. No problems with the book from the translation perspective. But there are a couple, and there have been some things from a FAQ perspective that have been done because of that. Now, I think it's important to mention that from a background perspective, Sharpe practice was initially done for Napoleonics. Musket and Tomahawks was very clear that it was the wars in North America. It covers French Indian War, American War of Independence, some of the Indian Wars, and so they're both black powder, but different eras and really different locations too. But now Sharpe Practice 2 has actually expanded that to cover other genres, including the French Indian War, American War of Independence. So it's still Napoleonics, but it covers those periods. If you actually don't have either one of these games and you're listening to this and you're kind of interested, I just tell you that, from that perspective, you will get a much more North American French Indian War, if that's kind of what you're looking for, American War of Independence feel from Musket and Tomahawks, because it's very dedicated to that. So just from a fluff perspective and the way the book's written, and even some of the things that are focused on in the depth, you're going to get more of that very specifically in Musket and Tomahawks. So that's sort of your background perspective. Now, Sharpe Practice is definitely, in my opinion, more suited for a style of gameplay where you have a bit of in-between skirmishing with small groups of miniatures to being able to also play the game with some interesting larger groups. So potentially 24 to 36 miniatures in one large formation. That would be big for the game, but it is suited for that. My friend Steve and I that just played the game, he did run a group of, I believe, 24 miniatures as the large group in our smaller kind of game. We played a bigger game than we normally do, but he ran one large group of Scottish Highlanders, very effective in having that kind of size group. You would not do that, have one formation in Musket and Tomahawks like that. You're not even really allowed to if you look at the list building. They're not meant to go that big. Your firing lines in Musket and Tomahawks, they try to give you the feel of a firing line. They give you some benefits and negatives to grouping into a firing line in Musket and Tomahawks, but it's a very surface level feel. It's enough to give you a taste and to try to use that to play the game, but it's not nearly as comprehensive as Sharpe Practice. You can actually go into different kinds of formations, not just a simple two-line firing line. If that's what you're looking for, if that's the kind of game you're looking for, Sharpe Practice has a greater feel of the fog of war, that you have leaders on the field that are giving out orders that want things to happen. And you don't always know whether you're going to get a chance to do it, because they're both card-based, but Sharpe Practice, the round can end at any time, and so you may not get a chance to use a leader because it may not work out that way, so there's a bit of a fog of war. You can't always activate when you want to, whereas pretty much in Musket and Tomahawks, you're always going to be able to activate your men. So, within reason. There are some things that we'll talk about in a moment, like with morale and things that will prevent you from activating your men, but it's not the basic activation mechanic that prevents you from activating your men. The feeling in Sharpe Practice is if you want to play an officer, or have that feeling of having officers, and really them giving orders and all the complications of that and trying to experience that, then it's a really great game for that. Whereas in Musket and Tomahawks, the officers have a role and they do make your troops more effective, but you can activate your troops without activating your officers, and there's limited ability to activate your troops without the officers in Sharpe practice, but it's not really designed for that. There's exceptional situations where you can, but it's really the officers are key in Sharpe practice. So, backing up a bit, deployment in Musket and Tomahawks it's scenario based, but it's fairly traditional. You know, picking sides of a table, and the scenario kind of dictates how you would deploy, and it's good, and I like it. One of the beautiful things in Sharpe practice is that you deploy. You have a deployment method where you have deployment points and sometimes secondary deployment points, and they can be even close to deployment points of your opponent. And depending on the kind of unit and whether they're in line of sight, there's an exercise that's gone through in deploying that's very interesting. And you're deploying also based on cards coming out too. And so I've played games where it took a while for my troops to show up. And that's an interesting part of the game. I mean, that, when you just are expecting certain things to happen and have troops show up and they just don't. And from a competitive perspective, you might not like that, but from a narrative perspective, it's really good. Like, I actually like it. I've had times where I just like the fact that my troops haven't shown up afterwards, because it just created a story in my head, and I just really liked it. Then they finally did show up. In the last game, my artillery didn't show up for a while. I think it was perhaps the first 2 turns they didn't show up. And it made a big difference in the game. I mean, well, I don't know. It could have had an effect on the game. I don't know that it would have changed the outcome. But yeah, it was very interesting. Combat is very different. Musket and Tomahawks utilizes a lot of modifiers. There are some modifiers in Sharpe practice too, but I would say in some ways the combat rules, many could be considered a little bit more streamlined in Sharpe practice. When you go from hitting to wounding or killing, well, I should say, let me back up again here. Sharpe practice is much more about putting fatigue, or shock, I should say, on your opponent than killing. And so we've had games where, like, just very few models die in Sharpe practice as compared to Musket and Tomahawks. That's just reality. Musket and Tomahawks is very bloody. It's like a quicker skirmish game, smaller amounts, but there's a lot of dying that happens. A lot of people get killed when they're shot, and it can be very hard to shoot people in Musket and Tomahawks, using the terrain and things. There can be lots of situations where it's almost impossible to kill your opponent even if you do shoot him. But reality is, as you saw in a game that I put up recently, there is a lot of dying. And that can be, fun. Like, it's not about... There is a suppression component to Musket and Tomahawks that happens through the morale table and the unit type, and I do like it. But Sharpe practice is primarily about getting your opponent's army to crumble through shock. In some ways, I found myself in the last game being disappointed when I killed instead of giving more shock. I just wanted to lay more and more shock. That's what you want to do, to try to get your opponent to retreat, then worry about just killing a model here and there. And so that is an interesting component to the battle. There's a force morale as well, and you can start getting things to happen once you start doing a lot as far as destroying units, I believe, but also just you can actually start to affect your opponent's force morale, which makes it harder for them to stay on the board and to stay in the game as well. And so that's kind of how you're trying to win in many cases. I find that Sharpe practice is a bit more generic in the building of your forces, because it's sort of... They created a system where you can do it across multiple periods, and there isn't it isn't as transparent to me as to how they came up with some of their points when you look at the list. And in some cases, units that have similar point values don't have as good of abilities or abilities at all, in comparison to other units of other armies of the same unit type. And so I think in some cases they went for historical precedence, and not necessarily balance, in my opinion, in certain instances. But it's really nothing that I don't think a little bit of house ruling and understanding with your opponent can't fix. And I don't really think the game is very well designed for tournaments. I think it's more meant to be a gentleman game with your friend, and so you're likely not going to have a problem with that anyway. I personally like the force building component of the game a little better in Musket and Tomahawks. The amount of detail that was put in there for the point cost and the differences and all that stuff. So they each actually have their own strengths. And I probably should have started out with saying this, but as of now, I really see both of them as games that I would not want either one of them to give up on. Like, I actually think both of them are really cool games that I see myself enjoying. A quicker, more skirmish level game, I think I'd probably be going for Musket and Tomahawks. There definitely would be times where I would rather play one versus the other. Because I'm a little bit biased at the moment because the Sharpe practice is a bit newer for me and has its own interesting components. I'm a little more keen to get some more games in on that. But I really think they both can be really, really fun games for different reasons. Like, if you wanted to play French-Indian War and you wanted to have a board covered with Forest, you're going to like Musket and Tomahawks more because Sharpe practice is with the unit formations and the heavy focus on unit formations. It's going to make it really difficult to play in heavily wooded games. Like, you can use skirmishers in Sharpe practice in those woods. I mean, it can do it. But if you're playing Sharpe practice, you're probably wanting to play some formations because the rules are just so geared towards it, in my opinion. But if you're playing, in particular, an easy way to put it would be, I think Sharpe practice would be much better for American War of Independence because of the more open warfare and the larger scale, whereas French-Indian War with the smaller, although, you still had thousands and thousands at times in battles, but I still think wooded French-Indian War type games would be better with Musket and Tomahawks if I had to just choose a narrative. Now, a very specific thing, this is drilling down a little bit, but I found that artillery worked much better, the rules I like much better in Sharpe practice. Artillery is very good in Musket and Tomahawks for taking out buildings and for taking out walls and stuff that people are holed up behind. But it's not that great for against your enemy because it's just you're fairly limited in the way it works to take people out in it. It doesn't work well when you're using a cannonball. But canister would be great, but nobody's going to stand in front of it when they know how it works. So people would just avoid it. It almost wouldn't even be relevant. You could strategically use it in Musket and Tomahawks just to keep people out of an area because they don't want to get close to that canister. But reality is it's 6-inch arc or something in Musket and Tomahawks. It's just people are going to just stay away from it. They're not even going to get a chance really to use it. That would be the only purpose. And so I think that you actually have a much better range and opportunity in Sharpe practice to use your artillery against your opponent's army. And in the last game that I played, it could have worked a little bit better for me, but I had a really good round of fire with it where I put a lot of shock on because you do double shock with artillery. And canister can shoot up to 24 inches away. So you can, instead of 6 inches, it's hugely different between the two games. So I do think that there's, if you want to pull certain specialty models out, there are each game might have some benefits. Having said that, like if you're wanting to play like what is it? Oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name of them. But some of the cavalry that use the lances on the French side. I'm having a mental breakdown here, but hussars. I'm not sure that they even have like all of the options. Like there are less options, and the one thing with the Too Far Lordy's game is they're expanding some of the lists and opportunities through facts. But I'm just comparing the books here of what comes with the book, and in that case, there are definitely some less options to individualize and the breadth of your forces as compared to Musket and Tomahawks in certain instances, in my opinion. Now, both games, interestingly enough, have lots of opportunity for the feel of narrative play. If you watch my battle reports for Musket and Tomahawks, you probably already have gotten a sense that between random events, side plots, you scenario building, and individualizing your officers and officer traits and things like that, there is a lot of opportunity in Musket and Tomahawks to have a really cool story generated. And I really felt that that's never been an issue. Like, Musket and Tomahawks is a great little skirmish game for that, and I've really enjoyed it. Now, they both do that. I'm not going to say either one better than the other, because I haven't played, and this is one of the reasons why I've not gotten to the series comparing the two in detail, is I don't really feel I've played Musket and Sharpe Practice enough to give it what it deserves as far as the full breadth of the rules and comparing the two. Because Sharpe Practice actually offers opportunities for narrative gaming. And some of it is built right into the mechanics, in that if you draw like a certain number of cards in a row, then the last unit that activated, depending on what they're doing, goes to a chart and has either benefits or mishaps or even potentially neutral things happen. In our last game, Steve's had two things happen. One of them was when some of his rangers all fired. I don't know if it's because the powder was wet or what, but basically when a little mishap happened, there was a huge plume of smoke that covered a section of the board that blocked line of sight. And so that was kind of interesting. Like we just had this huge amount of smoke that neither could shoot through for a little bit. That was kind of cool. And then also, I think his officer fell off his horse at one point and sprained his ankle, and did something that reduced some movement for a bit as well. And so that stuff happens. But also, in the rules, they allow you to take, like, secondary characters, and they give you all kinds of, options to do that, and some suggested rules on how to do it. And even, you can have, like, little missions as well, where you can send, like, a couple of your guys off, and they do, like, some sort of task. And so there's really, like, a lot of opportunity for narrative elements in Sharpe Practice as well, and I don't really think one of them does it necessarily better than the other. I think they will do it differently, and that's kind of refreshing, because if you really like the period and you're kind of wanting to play in these size games and have those elements, it's great to have two different ways that companies are trying to do that. The first couple times I played Sharpe Practice, they were fairly long games, but I think a big part of that was the learning the rules and looking in the rulebook a lot. They do make a cheat sheet. Both games have like a suggested cheat sheet you use to speed things up and get through the book a little bit better. Both rulebooks have their own sort of challenges at times as far as finding the information when you're learning the game. I find that Sharpe Practice is a little bit more difficult to absorb the book and know where everything is. It has rules like in a lot of different places for like the same kind of thing. Musket and Tomahawks, with the translation issues that I talked about earlier, also has some challenges that way, but I find it a little bit more intuitive. Of course, I'm slightly biased because I've been playing it for so long, but I'm trying to remember back as to how hard it was for either one of them, and I think that that is probably the case. I'm just like blowing through these wolves. I'm not going to have enough time to get to my next. I'm not going to have anything to do with my next topic unless I really think about it. So, yeah, like overall, I'd say I really like both of them. I might have to just do another one of these to talk further about it because I can't probably cover everything. I do think that, like I kind of hinted at before, that they both try to have a bit of a suppression element in breaking your opponent. Just that Musket and Tomahawks, a lot of it is based on your unit type, is to how easily you break, but then also it's based on having things happen and your reactions in the morale table cause you to do a number of different things. And as the composition of the unit and the things that are happening to the unit and the state of your force, like when you draw the morale card, you could view that as having a lower force morale. It's similar to Sharpe practice because you've already lost a lot of models and there's a lot of things that have caused you to get that morale card, and now that morale card is going to make your reactions different. So Musket and Tomahawks actually approaches it through the morale table, and a number of things interacting with the morale table is to breaking your force is breaking, and it can happen very quick if you have a lot of stars aligned. Like let's say you're playing natives, which tend to flee a little bit easier than the regulars, and they're in smaller groups to begin with. So if they lose a lot in like one round, there's a good chance that they're going to be running or strategically retreating and things like that. In Sharpe practice, they do it through an accumulation of shock. It's a completely different mechanic. And then that shock inhibits you in a lot of ways, in the way you can move and where you can move and how you can shoot. And so it's two very different approaches, but both do, in my opinion, have this element of suppression. There is a lot more detail on Sharpe practice on this formation piece, as I've said, and this shock piece, and how these things that they want to do with your officers and how they operate. Much more so than Musket and Tomahawks, where Musket and Tomahawks has a lot more detail. I think probably on special abilities to some degree for your units. There's definitely information Sharpe practice that as well, but then very specific things to the period, like boats on rivers, and even just tomahawks themselves, and just like thrown weapons. It's just more information when you read about it than just a little kind of blurb in the Sharpe practice manual for the French Indian War section, I think. So I think they each have their own things that they really focus on, but both are actually really, really good games. And so hopefully you like the pictures that I've thrown up here too as I've been talking about this. But yeah, so for those of you, I think Dan was one that's asked a couple of times for me to talk about this. I will talk more about it in the future. I will be putting, for sure, in the next bit, at least one battle report coming up in the next, I would say in the next 1 to 2 months, I'll have a battle report up on Sharpe practice. And so, yeah, and then I'll likely do some more commentary on that. Yeah. So, next topic, and taking a little break here as I transition topics, as I'm actually almost through with all these noses. Next, I thought I'd talk about new releases in our games and other things, as well as like new additions. In particular, like I'm kind of talking about them in the same way, because a new release can be something for the first time. But I think in a lot of ways, my focus on this is talking about games that come out with a new edition. Now, we all know that the big news on the street, for those of you that are into the fictional side of wargaming, is that Warhammer 40k is coming out with its 8th edition. I'm not an expert on everything that's come out. I've honestly not read through it all. I've watched some people's videos just talking about it, and I've watched the rumors as they've come out a little bit and considered some of the things that I've been hearing. But I've not focused on it heavily. I'll talk about that in a moment. essentially, I didn't put on this video like Warhammer 40k 8th edition to try to get a whole bunch of clickbait. I don't think everybody that's talking about this is trying to do that, but essentially you look all over the place and it's all over right now, and I'm not really trying to attract that audience. I don't want the folks coming here to try to figure out what's going on with the Warhammer 8th, because I'm not going to tell you. I didn't really want to speak negatively about it, and I didn't really want to speak positively about it. I'm a little ambivalent, to be honest. I've heard all this stuff about like various things changing, like including a movement characteristic for models that like they had in the past, making vehicles having toughness values instead of armor values, and I think like monstrous creatures have gone through that sort of they've always talked about like monstrous creatures versus vehicles and going back and forth on how that should work. And like one of the good things I know is that they're not going to, well, in my opinion, is that they're doing away with the codex and just going to be offering much more content for free, which that I think is actually a really good thing and a good decision on their part. I do like having nice books and buying things that are related to the hobby, and I'm sure they will be offering books to some degree, to have nice hardbound books that you can read about the stuff you like. But at the same time, having a lot of the core stuff available to you to play the game for free is a good move, in my opinion. Because one of my big complaints in the past has always been having to buy everything every time. But honestly, the reason I'm ambivalent is that nothing that I've really heard has made me radically think that I'm going to approach this game or experience something very different. And that's not bad or good. I'm just kind of on to other things right now. I'm not really on to 40k as much as I love the background and have had so much fun in the past. If there was something that radically changed my experience, that I felt was radically going to change it, and I'd pull out my models and say, yeah, like I'm probably going to try this. But nothing so far that I've seen has created that thing that's made me say, well, yeah, like I need to try this now because this is going to be different. No. Like, whether I'm going 6 inches or rolling a 6-sided die and adding +2 or moving 5 with one and 7 with the other, it's not going to change that much for me in the way I feel about it, the game. And so that's kind of why I'm not doing any titled videos for Warhammer 8th, and I'm not like jumping right into it, and just I'm a bit ambivalent, and I'm not really negative. And so we're talking new releases here as the topic, and I'll go on to why I think new releases can be actually quite good in additions. And also just who they're for and things like that. I mean, who are these things really for, these new releases? So, is a new release of 40k, a new edition, really for new fans? It might be, in the sense that if you, like similar to Age of Sigmar, you're trying to draw a new audience. So maybe offering the rules for free and some of those components is for new fans. But in a lot of ways, the hype around a new release for me is for the community, like the existing community, to kind of rally around the game and all that's offered. It's sort of like a celebration in some ways of something you like, and I think that is good. I've often said that I really hope they make a Musket and Tomahawks 2, like version 2. And it's not because I want to spend the money on another rulebook, that I want to spend that money, like just to do that in and of itself. I do think that sometimes with new releases you get better product as time goes on. Sometimes, a nicer book or this or that. In the case of Musket and Tomahawk, it's a very aged kind of publication as compared to the contemporary wargaming publications, so I would like a nice book with color photographs and a new approach to writing the rules. Another kick at it, I guess. But as well, it's to bring in new fans, but it's also just to keep the support going. The community and what they want changes at times. I noticed they're talking about different things with, there's this whole idea of the assault phase in 40k versus the shooting phase, and like which one's going to be more powerful and over time, and there were certain editions where it was more powerful to be in the hand-to-hand, had the advantage in the game, where then there were other times where it's the shooting, which is, I think, the more current. Well, that waxes and wanes. As an example, there are going to be times, when you've had a number of editions where shooting is much better. Just like in politics, when you have a number of, terms where certain parties in office, eventually people just want to see a change, and it's not really a new change, right? We just want it back to being a little bit more towards this way. And that happens, right, with new edition releases in a game. And it's not a bad thing, because it's the community and what they want, right? They kind of sense what the community wants, and they're just changing it up, just mixing it up a bit. It's the same game, but it allows you to just play it a little bit differently. And in some cases, playing it how you played it 8 years ago. So, in some ways, it is just really for the existing fans, to celebrate that game and to change it up a bit. And, at the end of the day, it may not really offer a completely new experience, but it's changing it up just enough to have you enjoy it. It's also just bringing out all the swag, which not everybody kind of gives into this, but I'll admit I'm, just as bad as anyone else in seeing new model kits. In some ways, I think that's the best thing, is the new model kits and the new books. All the stuff that kind of goes along with it is fun. Now, I've talked a bit here now about how I'm very ambivalent on this new 40K release. It doesn't really affect me much at all. I don't want to make it sound as if I'm immune to releases, of things that I like. When I talked about who is this for, in a lot of ways this is for the fanboys, right? New releases and all the hype that goes around it and all the stuff. It's for the community and the AKA the fanboy nation of that, whatever genre and game that is. I am a fanboy of things. I experience that just like everybody else. I have two examples where I really got into something like a fanboy on release for different reasons. I may or may not have mentioned this on the channel, but I'm not really a video game person, but the one game that I have full intention of always playing every time a new one comes out, and I'll likely even buy a console just to play that game, would be the Elder Scrolls. I really like Elder Scrolls. I started playing them during the Morrowind era, so it was the third one, I think. It wasn't even within the first two, but it essentially is a couple of games ago, and they were spread apart by a lot of time. So I think we were looking at in the area of 2005, 2004 maybe when it came out. And I loved it. I loved the open world aspect of Skyrim. Whether it be Morrowind, I'm saying Skyrim now because Skyrim was amazing, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But whether it be Skyrim, Oblivion, the game before it, or Morrowind, the thing about this open world gaming where it's not an MMO. I'm not talking about the MMO they released later for Skyrim. This is just you playing the game, nobody else. Talking to your friends and having other people running around you. This is just you with the disc in the game and playing. But it's very much a big open world where you can walk into houses and go to sleep on a bed and have dinner, and you can go out on an adventure and just walk out the door and go wherever you want. There's no path that you have to take for the most part. I liked I like a lot of things in these games. I mean, I like the missions or the quests and all this stuff, but I like having a character that I've created and just relaxing and playing the game, and just at one point something like just walking into the woods and just sitting there, and you can literally see butterflies go by and listen to the sound of the wind, and be in the middle of nowhere in this sort of imaginary world. And like that is the magic of the Elder Scrolls games and their recent renditions for me, and why I love them. Now, I got Skyrim in 2011 when it came out. I got it, and I bought a PS3 to play it. I played Oblivion much later after it was released. I didn't kind of hit Oblivion until shortly before Skyrim came out, because I was a big Morrowind fan. But I played that thing to death. I loved it. And my daughter plays it as well. And has played it more than me now since 2011. I mean, she has played it as recently as 2 weeks ago. Like, I haven't played it in a while. She played it last weekend. She plays it quite a bit, and she knows probably Skyrim and the actual place better than I do. When Skyrim came out in 2011, I actually went to the midnight release. There's only 2 times I've ever done that in my life. Went to a midnight release for something. But that is a total fanboy thing to do. And the Skyrim one was fun. I mean, like, I was outside this game store, and I was not alone. I was, like, getting a number, like, to get this game the night before. And literally, like, there were people, like, blasting, like, the theme song in the parking lot from their cars, like, waiting for the doors to open. It was just crazy. And I'm still, despite being that excited to get it at the midnight release and to do all that, I didn't play it through the night like a lot of people did and, like, finish it and or whatever. I just played it a bit and went to bed, and then played it a lot for a long time. Most likely my daughter will be going to the next midnight release, the next time they release a game for the Elder Scrolls that's like this. I'm not interested at all in the MMO world, like those kind of games, and so I know that I'm hoping that they move away from that model. Like, they did it once with Skyrim, but I'm really hoping they move away from that. But because then I would be done. It completely doesn't go, it goes against kind of what I play the game for. Now I have to go back and say, like, I'm really no longer a video game person. Like, I don't play video games at all right now. It's just that game that I go back to when it does come out. I played a lot of the Commodore 64 when I was a little kid, but over the years I kind of dabbled, but I'm not really big into video games. I also played a lot of Space Marine. That was the second game that I played a lot of at the time of Skyrim, and why I ended up getting quite a bit back into the tabletop gaming because of it. So, I am capable of that, and there is an excitement that happens with new releases, a refreshing of it. It's really exciting for the fans, the fanboys. And so I understand that. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it can be quite fun. And so I'm kind of happy for the people that are really excited for the 40K stuff. Like, just because I'm ambivalent has nothing to do with me being, like, not wanting other people to have fun. So I'm kind of glad. And I do hope it's better, and I hope it has things that will make me... Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. I don't really want it to have things that will make me want to play again. Because I have so many other things I want to do now that I don't really need another distraction. One day, I think I just need some time off, and one day I'll come back and play 40K again. I may even just paint up stuff for Eldar and Mechanicum, in the interim, just painting. And I'm definitely doing my Old Hammer Rogue Trader stuff. That kind of scratches my itch. But now, the other thing that I did was 40K. When I came back to 40K, when 6th edition was coming out, and the Eldar came out with the Eldar release, I have videos of that time when it happened earlier in the channel. I went to the midnight release for the Eldar. That was the time when the Wraith Knight came out for the first time, the Spirit Seer, new codex. There were some other things too, some other cool things. I think the jet bikes they remodeled, I think, at that time. and then a jet bike Farseer, perhaps. Might have been the one after that. Because I didn't get those at the time. I got like a Spirit Seer, I got like a Wraith Knight. Oh, they updated the Wraith Guard. And so all of that was really exciting because I was so psyched for all the Eldar stuff. And I loved getting the new models, painting the new models, getting the new codex. I was playing the codex they were using for 5th edition was many editions old at that point. And for everybody that talks about Eldar being overpowered, I mean, that was the time when the Wraith Knight came out and they actually retooled the Eldar Codex and made it much more powerful. Up until that point, for many, many years, folks were using an old codex that still people in casual games, for sure, were still doing well and being able to win, but many people considered it to be extremely outdated. And it was becoming a laughable thing, like Sisters or whatever. Like, people were just starting to talk about how it was crazy that they weren't updating it. So they needed a big update. Whether or not it should have been as competitive and powerful as it became is a whole nother story for another day and another discussion. But I went in there, and unlike the Skyrim one, I was like the only one there. There were people doing some sort of card game, but I was the only one picking up the Eldar models at the biggest local shop, not a GW, mind you, but the biggest local tabletop game shop. I went in there and had pre-ordered the stuff, and I really thought I might have trouble getting... I really wanted the Spirit Seer. In some ways, even though I wanted the Wraith Knight the most because it was such a big box and everything, and a big model, I was very intrigued with the bringing back of the Spirit Seer type character. And so I really was most intrigued in some ways about that. And I wanted to make sure that I got one. So yeah, even with 40K, I've done that and got really excited and everything. I actually really liked 6th edition. I know a lot of people that didn't. I enjoyed the game at that time. And so, yeah, sometimes I guess it's just the way you think about things in the past and perspective. Yeah. So I just sort of wanted today to bring up this idea of new editions as a new experience and for who, rather than talking specifically just about the 40K release. And speaking it either in a negative or positive way overly, because like I said, I'm kind of ambivalent. But I do think it's good, a really good time for folks that are interested in something heavily. Now, when I was thinking about this for this discussion, I was thinking about the historical folks too and how they would feel about something like this. Because my channel, lately, I don't really know how many people are into more historical versus the fictional stuff on my channel. I suspect it's more historical because if you actually look at my playlist, I probably have more for Musk and Tomahawks than anything on my channel. There's going to be a lot of fantasy over the next year coming up in addition to historical, so I think that there'll be no lacking of content on my channel for either. But I was thinking about the historical side and how that relates to this, and what I was thinking is there are many times that people should feel really excited about a new release, and in some cases it's not even just a new release of something that's been out, but something that's just come out. I was thinking of Ralph Astley when Congo came out, because Ralph, I was thinking, probably had the models for Congo 20 years ago. I don't know, Ralph maybe might chime in, but I know he got the actual miniatures that they then just recently released in a set for Congo, but that Foundry had already available. He got those a long time ago, is what he was saying, before they repackaged them like this, when they sold them individually. He's been interested in the period that the Congo game is set in, long before the game was released. And so when the game was announced by a great company like Studio Tomahawk, who makes Saga, which Ralph also plays, rightly so, I think he was probably extremely excited. And I know he really likes the game. I watched his bat reps for it, and you already had all the stuff, and that's a great situation where you should really be excited. You're already interested in this thing, and in many ways even prepared for it before it even came out, and then they come out with a great rule set for that. And so you should be like biting at the bit to get that rule set when it comes out. I'm trying to think, like, I don't have too many situations that are similar. I was talking about my interest in the Old West at one point, and even today, even though I don't want to get into a lot more things, I've talked about how maybe next year I'll do some Old West gaming. I'll likely only do it. I'm really just waiting for an Old West game to come out that I really want to play. I'm waiting for them to release Palmer's Dream Old West game, where it's like really creative in how you make your group, and I really like the game mechanics, and it's very open-ended, and you know, it has lots of options and a very slick system and well-produced book, and like all of these things. All that's gonna wrap together, and then I'm gonna be like, boom, I want that, you know, and I'm gonna be waiting for it to come out, and I'm gonna buy like a bunch of cool miniatures for it. But until that happens, you know, it's all sort of just, I guess, just out there. I'm not really, at this point, I'm not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. I'm not that serious, overly serious. I may try the Legends of the Old West. Just if I do get a real strong desire to do some Old West gaming, I might just try that one. But I don't have like a major strong pull towards the Old West until something comes out that sort of fills that void and makes me really want to play it. So I don't really have too many examples like Congo with Ralph, and Ralph already had those miniatures. Yeah, so yeah, you know, really great thing, you know, that that they're making some changes and supporting the game. You know, I do think it's good to continually support it. I think you can make an argument as to how often you want to see your games updated because you want to get some use out of your stuff. But I think there's got to be a fine line there to some degree, as to how often they do it and how often you got to fork out money just to be able to refresh this thing. Musket and Tomahawks, I really think, needs it. And I've talked on the channel about Shakos and Bayonets. They've talked about Shakos and Bayonets. I guess it's in... I don't even think it's actually in a finalized form in the French version. I think it's been tested a little bit. But it's, I think, supposed to be Napoleonics with a very similar rule set to Musket and Tomahawks. Now, whether they're going to incorporate both in one book, I don't know. I have really mixed feelings on it. Initially, when I heard that, I was like, yes, like I can play Napoleonics now in the game I really like, and they'll update the Musket and Tomahawks like I wanted to, and I was really, excited at it, for it. And in some ways, I was kind of like the way I described Ralph with Congo, like I'm waiting for this to come out. I was asking on the board, starting to get a little frustrated that nobody's answering anything at all, or chiming in at all. But I was really gunning for it, and as years have went by, it seems like... My perspective has changed a bit. It's not that I don't want them to refresh Musket and Tomahawks. I do, like I mentioned that. But it's a little bittersweet for me because I have this feeling now when playing Sharpe Practice and seeing a book that tries to do many periods, I have a little bit of a sadness to see them move away from Musket and Tomahawks and do Shakos and Bayonets, and if they do lump all that in, which I hope they would at least give you a way to play Musket and Tomahawks in the new book, I can't see it really having the flavor of the old game. Even if you're allowed to play in French-Indian War times, if the book isn't dedicated for French-Indian War and American War of Independence in that time period like Musket and Tomahawks is, there's a little bit of a loss to me, in that, and I'd be a little saddened by that. Don't get me wrong, I'll take what I can get, and I would likely get the Shakos and Bayonets if it came out. But in some ways, I would rather have Musket and Tomahawks 2. That's kind of what I'd really like. Now, this is kind of a silly thing, but the other thing that I just wasn't really sure might play a factor is on the Facebook page for Studio Tomahawk, they have actually mentioned that Musket and Tomahawks is going out of print soon, and so to get your copy if you want it, because it won't be, they said it's going out of print for a while. So I don't know what that means. I don't know if going out of print for a while means they are planning on coming out with another edition of something to replace it. Either its sequel or Shakos and Bayonets. That would be what I would be led to believe. Or if it just means that it's going out of print until, like, they can do something with some sort of publisher until they can get a whole bunch more printed up. It could be either. I don't really know. But that actually has been mentioned, and so it is sort of on my mind. It sort of comes up in a timely way. But now, what I was trying to get at here, and I realize I'm going on a Musket and Tomahawks tangent with this whole new release discussion, but I think I'm going to be sort of finishing up this chat soon. I don't know how long I've gone for. Feels like always it's been very short, but I don't have too much more to talk about this week. Studio Tomahawk's name is Studio Tomahawk after Musket and Tomahawks. It's got a tomahawk in the symbol of the name. Can they really let Musket and Tomahawks die? Like, legally you can. I mean, like, you can have a logo that has nothing to do with the games that you produce and all that stuff. I suppose it won't stop them from doing anything that they want to do. But doesn't it seem kind of silly? Like, doesn't it seem like Studio Tomahawk should make sure that there's always a Musket and Tomahawks game? I don't know. That's just my opinion. It seems like from a branding business perspective and the fact that it's such a great game, people like it, and it's like an integral to the name of your product. I mean, I guess they could call it Studio Saga and just change the name. You know, that would maybe be more fitting with when it came to the amount of products they release and time investment. But I don't know. That's kind of what I was thinking, is that, you know, I'm hoping they at least keep that as a core part of what they offer. If anybody at Studio Tomahawk is watching this, or related, you know, pass that along. I do a lot of videos for the game. So, alright everybody. Well, I hope everybody's week has gone well. I'm going to sign off here now. I've painted all the noses. I've talked through the points I've wanted to talk. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll talk to you later. Take care.